The meeting is live already. Okay, very good. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this exciting session with the ambassador of Georgia, the United States to Georgia, Ambassador Degnan, and General Ben Hodges. None of them need introduction in Georgia. Both are well known to the audience. And I will try I will try to very cautiously use the time that we have for this meeting, because there is really a lot to discuss. There is a lot happening in Georgia, around Georgia and the Black Sea region. And we will try to focus today, this morning, on the Black Sea security, and General Hodges has been focusing on the Black Sea security for years now, and he has an extensive experience and knowledge of the ongoing situation, as well as the most recent developments. So I'm really happy that he was able to accept our invitation and share this knowledge and experience with us. I would like to thank EPRC Georgia for organizing all this and putting this together. And then let us start with the opening remarks from Ambassador Degnan, and then we will proceed with the conversation with General Ben Hodges. So, Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Shota. It's really a pleasure for me to be here. I want to thank also EPRC for hosting this very timely event and giving me the honor of introducing Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who, as you said, is certainly an expert in European security and particularly in the Black Sea. As I think most of us know, General Hodges is currently the Pershing Chair in Strategic Studies at the Center for European Policy Analysis, where we are fortunate to have his expertise to help us analyze European security issues with a focus on the Black Sea. General Hodges previously served as Commanding General for United States Army Europe, and before that had a very long and distinguished military career, including serving in a number of joint and Army staff positions, and perhaps most notably for this region as commander of NATO Allied Land Command in Izmir, Turkey. So we are very, very fortunate to have him here with us today, and I'm very looking forward to hearing his remarks. I just wanted to say briefly that obviously today's discussion on the Black Sea comes at a critical time for Georgia as well as for the region. With the threat from Russia looming, ensuring coordination and collaboration among Black Sea countries as well as NATO allies is absolutely crucial to countering Russian aggression and maintaining the European and international security principles that have been the cornerstones of stability and economic growth for decades. There is a great deal at stake here, and this is really a crisis that Russia has created that puts these significant accomplishments at risk. Within Georgia, now is the time for all of Georgia's political parties, both the ruling party and the opposition parties, to unite and work together against Russian aggression, against the aggressive disinformation that we're seeing, and against efforts to derail Georgia's economic Atlantic integration. These are threats faced by every citizen of Georgia, and mitigating these threats will similarly require unity and resilience from all members of Georgia's diverse society, just as in Ukraine. While the threat to Ukraine is clear and imminent, Russia's threat to Georgia continues with Russia's occupation of 20% of Georgia's territory, and more immediately threatening the lives and livelihood of those living within or near occupied Abkhazia and South Ossetia. The United States strongly supports Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as its right to determine its own path and alliances, something that Russia is calling into question for both Ukraine and for Georgia right now. The path that Georgian people have chosen has been towards further European Atlantic integration, and that's clear from poll after poll after poll. That is the direction that this country wants to go forward in. The United States is prepared to continue to support Georgia on its path. Much work remains, and Georgia must further consolidate its democratic gains as it prepares for future NATO and EU membership. And this is something that the United States is doing what we can to support Georgia and the Georgian people in so many different sectors. And it's very impressive to see the progress that Georgia is making along this path. Looking beyond the current tensions, of course, Georgia has been aligning itself more closely with its fellow Black Sea countries that share Georgia's security priorities and Western democratic values. We have long seen this potential in Georgia. We see it as an opportunity to increase Georgia's ties to Europe and NATO across the Black Sea. And this could bring, in our view, both economic stability and security for both Georgia and other Black Sea nations. Georgia plays a very important role in helping to ensure Black Sea security and has proven to be a capable and reliable partner to NATO. Engagement and collaboration with other Black Sea countries on cybersecurity, energy, combating hybrid threats are other areas where Georgia can help strengthen security, as many of these countries are facing the same threats and problems. Georgia also plays an important economic role in the region. The Black Sea remains key for Georgia's broader economic growth and development as a regional transport link connecting East and West. Strategically integrated road, rail, and sea transport offer real opportunities for Georgia to connect with its Black Sea neighbors. I was just at the opening of a new port terminal in Poti on Saturday. That was another step forward for Georgia in being able to contribute to these regional networks that I think we all hope we'll see more of in the coming years. But it will be very important for Georgia to build investor confidence, including developing a cohesive port strategy to fulfill its full economic potential on the Black Sea. These are just a few comments with a Georgia perspective. Again, we are seeing real progress in many areas that Georgia has prioritized. There's a lot more work to be done, and I hope that in cooperation and collaboration with its Black Sea neighbors, Georgia is going to be able to fulfill its potential for both economic growth and stability in this region. Thank you very much, Shota, for the opportunity to join you today. I know General Hodges will provide some very insightful perspectives on the region as a whole and the particular challenges that the region is facing today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for this great opening remarks and for making time this morning to join this event and for everything that the United States has been doing for Georgia actually throughout the decades. And I think that the whole notion of strategic partnership is really visible through the chronology of US-Georgia relations and in the number of areas which you clearly pointed out in defense and security, as well as in economic development, in promoting democracy in Georgia. The United States and its help and support has been indispensable for the progress that we have made so far in all of those directions. So I really thank you for your particular share in that and for everything that the United States people and the country has done for us to achieve some progress in all of those areas. And now I would love to unfold a little bit of what you have just mentioned, Ambassador, with General Ben Hodges. And thank you, by the way, for taking my job and introducing him in such a great way, so I don't have to do it again. Thank you for that. And Ambassador, as far as I know, you will be here throughout the meeting, and we will now focus on defense and security, especially related to the Black Sea security. And I would ask the audience to prepare for the questions, which we will take through the chat room and chat function. But please keep your questions closely related to the topic of this meeting, which is the Black Sea security and defense and security in Georgia and around Georgia. So with that, let me ask you a first question, General Hodges. If you don't mind, I will start with the broader picture and I will try to then zoom into more specific details. So in order to set the scene for the further conversation, let me ask you this. Why is the Black Sea important for NATO and for the United States? What are the compelling interests that NATO on one hand and the United States on the other have here in the Black Sea?
Shota, that's the perfect question to start with, and I'm glad you're giving me the chance to address that. But I do want to say first how pleased I am not just to have this opportunity, but to do it with one of our best professional diplomats in the United States Department of State. We are well served by Ambassador Kelly Degnan in Georgia, as are the people of Georgia, with her being our representative. You don't have to ask for a forward stationing of U.S. troops. She equals an armored brigade herself in terms of combat power. So very, very proud of her, right? And I want to say that over the last few weeks, our State Department, I had not seen this much comprehensive diplomatic effort in it across all the European nations and Canada, so our allies and partners and friends, and at every level, and comprehensive, not just at the ambassador level, not just at the secretary level, but everywhere, to help everyone understand what the threat is and what's going on, so that we have a combined, unified approach to dealing with the Kremlin and this threat that we all face right now. So really hats off to Secretary Blinken and his team. I haven't seen it like this since 1995, when the Clinton administration was leading the way with for the Dayton Peace Accords. I mean, really impressive. But that's what it takes. I mean, if it was easy, it'd be getting handled at the local level, and that's what it takes. So to your question, which is also going to require comprehensive, continuous diplomatic effort, but also economic effort and information effort and military effort, is helping Americans, helping the Congress understand why the Black Sea is so important to us. And there are 4 or 5 reasons that come to mind right away, but they do now because I've been staring at it for the last 10 years. Honestly, before that, it was not obvious to me why the Black Sea was so important. And that's a little bit of our challenge. The Black Sea is important to the United States, number one, because we have 3 NATO allies that are on the Black Sea, and we have treaty obligations to help contribute to their defense, their collective defense. So that's an important aspect of our Black Sea strategy. And then we have friends like Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova in the Black Sea region that we want to see help grow and develop into vibrant, liberal, democratic societies where the talent of young people can be unleashed. So who's there is the first reason it's strategically important to us. The second reason it's strategically important to us is the economic potential that Ambassador Degnan just talked about. I mean, if you can step back from the map, and I'm talking to people in the United States and people in Western Europe, step back from the map and realize that this is one of the 3 east-west economic corridors between Europe and Eurasia, and it's the only one that doesn't go through Russia or through Iran. And so this is a logical place for massive trade, energy, communications networks to go back and forth between Europe and Eurasia. And Georgia, of course, is in the catbird seat, as we say. I mean, you're the portal. Everything should be going through Georgia. And so for the United States, developing the economic potential of the Caucasus, but this would also benefit Ukraine. It would help Romania, Turkey, Bulgaria, and everybody up the Danube River as well. So the economic potential in so many ways is huge. That's why it's strategically important for us. From a security standpoint, it's strategically important because the Black Sea offers a buffer against Iran and Islamic extremism. And then finally, of course, the Black Sea is the launching pad for all the malign activity of the Russian Federation. Everything that Russia does that is bad, unhelpful in the Black Sea region, in the Caucasus, in the Balkans, and in Syria and in Africa emanates from the Black Sea. And so if we want to disrupt, neutralize their ability for their malign activities, we've got to be there. We've got to compete in the Black Sea region. So those are 4 reasons why we need every member of Congress to care and understand the Black Sea, why it matters to us, and why we need a strategy for that.
Absolutely, and this leads me directly to my second question. You mentioned Russia and, to say the least, very unhelpful policies that Russia has been implementing in the region, and especially in recent years, we have seen very aggressive use of military force in the region, a threat of use of military force, and this does not obviously help neither the regional security in the Black Sea nor the broader Euro-Atlantic security paradigm and rules and the principles that has been there since the Second World War, signed, by the way, also by the Russian Federation under the number of treaties and charters, such as the Helsinki Final Act and the Paris Charter, and not to mention the United Nations founding documents and charters. And what we have seen in the Black Sea specifically is that Russia has been in gross violation of all those rules and principles. And it started back in 2008 when Russia invaded Georgia, and then because Russia really didn't have to pay enough political and economic price for what they did in Georgia, then they were emboldened, in my understanding, to continue this aggressive policy in the region in Ukraine. And here we are now. We see the situation escalated to the let's say maximum point now, and we're all sitting and thinking what to do about it. But how would you describe Russia's interests in the region? How do you see Russia actually looking at this region and designing its policies? What does Russia want in this region? And obviously Russia is not the only player here with, let's say, malign interests and policies. So there is also China, and China is always another elephant in the room, you know, nowadays. So taking into account all this sharks, herring, and mermaids that we are observing recently in the Black Sea, how would you map out this threat landscape in the Black Sea, and how do you see these threats for the region unfolding in today's reality?
Well, obviously, the most visible manifestations of this we see in Ukraine, where Russia used force to change sovereign borders of a European country starting in 2014. You know, when people say, if Russia invades Ukraine, well, of course, they already did 8 years ago, and they're still there, occupying Crimea and half or about 1/3 of the Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts. So they're still there. And of course, as the ambassador said, they occupy 20% of Georgia, which since 2008, and they never left there. And they still have about, the number varies between 1 and 2,000 in Transnistria. So the actual use of force to control, to occupy territory in the Black Sea region is very visible with those that I just talked about. But it's not just military that they use. In fact, far more often they use other types of leverage in their hybrid toolbox, if you will. I don't think Russians think in terms of at war, not at war. I think actually they're always at war. It's what tool do they use? You know, on one end, it's disinformation, it's cyber, it's turning the gas on and off or threatening to, it's unbelievable claims to, like, this is Russia, meaning the entire North Pole, the Arctic, you know, things like that. And then on the other end, you've got the threat of a nuclear weapon. All of their major exercises always end with a nuclear scenario or a nuclear strike. And they do that, number one, to maintain proficiency, but also to make sure that every ambassador, every prime minister, every foreign minister knows that Russia actually has the ability and demonstrates the will to use a nuclear weapon. And so that's in everybody's mind. So there's, along that continuum of tools, and they'll be used in different combinations. I mean, think about it. What have we all been watching the last few weeks? Is video after video after video of trains loaded with tanks and artillery and armored fighting vehicles heading towards Ukraine, heading towards Belarus. So when some people might say, you know, the use of steel armored vehicles is an anachronism, obviously the Kremlin has every intention of being able to employ blunt force as part of their efforts to compel. But they're also, and this is where I think Georgia plays such an important role, the Russians are always looking to block economic development if it's unhelpful to them. That's the opposite of competition. And what I'm talking about, of course, I think one of the reasons that Georgia has not become even more developed as this portal is because the Kremlin is doing everything it can to prevent Georgia from becoming this portal, this economic hub. Because if they do, and then you have Germany, France, the Netherlands, UK, not just the US, but other Western European countries start investing in there. And then when they do that, then the Bundestag or the British Parliament and the other parliamentary bodies and governments start paying attention to what's going on. And it's like, why do we have Russian soldiers still in Georgia, for example? And so it limits investment. And I think, which is why, by the way, economic development is perhaps even more important as an element of strategy than is military and security cooperation. Ukraine, of course, like other Black Sea nations, has sought to develop the gas, the carbon-based or fossil fuel resources that are underneath the Black Sea basin. Ukraine recently had a Norwegian seismic team out doing seismic surveys to determine where they might drill next. Well, no surprise to anybody that watches this, Norway came under huge pressure from Russia. Of course, Norway has to deal with Russia all the time as a neighboring country on water issues, boundary issues, fishing issues, energy issues. And so the Kremlin put a lot of pressure on Norway to stop assisting Ukraine with seismic research in the Black Sea. This kind of activity goes on all the time. And it's also partly why Turkey, our NATO ally, is always so challenged, because they depend an awful lot on Russia for trade, for tourism, and for energy. And so I think Turkey's willingness to enforce Montreux to the T strictly, particularly when we talk about Russian submarines that go through there, I think their ability to do this is hindered a little bit because of the economic pressure, the economic threat from Russia. So this competition encompasses everything. The claim to territorial water around Crimea. I think only North Korea, Syria, and Venezuela recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea. So nobody should be recognizing the waters around Crimea as Russian waters. But that was the justification they used to seize Ukrainian vessels. You remember a couple of years ago. It's international law is what the international community says it is or allows it to be, and this is their tactic, is to assert influence, assert authority, even though it's not theirs. And let me conclude by asking, why in the world do they still have a seat on the Danube River Commission? I mean, the Danube River goes nowhere near Russia. Obviously, it used to be when it was the Soviet Union, but it's not, hadn't been the Soviet Union for 30 years. Why does Russia still have a seat on? Why are they able to influence policies, development, maintenance of the Danube River?
Well, great, General. You pointed out a number of very important pressing issues, and I will try to pick up some of them and ask you the follow-up questions. And first of all, I would like to hear your opinion about Turkey and Turkey's role in the Black Sea security so far, because we know that Turkey has been looking at the Black Sea region in a bit different way before in the past, and the Turkish policy was always based on the understanding that Turkey somehow had an exclusive, let's say, security arrangements related to the Black Sea, and it didn't need much help from other NATO allies to secure the Black Sea region. But since the annexation of Crimea, it has become very clear to everybody, including in Ankara, that Turkey will not be able to provide security to the Black Sea on its own, and it will need more engagement from the allies. But on the other hand, we see this fluctuating relations between Turkey and Russia, and this is most visible here in the Black Sea, and also in the other regions as well. In the Middle East, it is also quite clear that the interests of these two regional powers are sort of contradictory, but they try to cooperate on some specific, more operational aspects there. And we have seen all the range of things happening, from downing the Russian jet in Turkey, from a purchase of the important air defense systems from Russia by the NATO member state. And then today there is a new initiative which we have nicknamed 3+3 in Georgia, which includes three big regional countries, Turkey, Russia, and Iran on one hand, and three smaller countries, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan on the other. Georgian government has made its position clear regarding this format, and they said they're not going to join, but still there is a pressure from Russia as well as from Turkey on Georgia to become part of this new regional initiative. So what do you think that in this situation Georgia should do in the first place, and what would be the role of Turkey in balancing those threats that you have pointed out in your previous remark?
So Turkey is our essential ally in the region, not just the Black Sea region, but perhaps in the Middle East. Part of our problem is if you walk into any headquarters in Europe and the US, you look at a map on the wall, and Turkey and the Black Sea are always kind of down in the bottom right-hand corner of the map, map of Europe. And I remember when I had been in Izmir for just a few months, and I was meeting with the senior member of the Turkish General Staff at a working breakfast, and I said, "Sir, how's it going?" He goes, "Ben, I tell you what, I wake up in the morning, I have Russia to the north, Iran, Iraq, and Syria to the south, the Caucasus to the east, and the Balkans to the west. It's a hell of a neighborhood." And I kind of laughed, and then I thought, well, yeah, of course. On his map, Turkey's in the middle of it. And so when I started thinking differently about the geography, I started thinking differently about the importance of Turkey. It's not just the gatekeeper over the straits. It's not just a place where we have Incirlik Air Base. It has so much more strategic importance to all of us from a security standpoint, from an economic standpoint, and frankly, with such a large population and such a large economy, it affects everything that we care about in the region, in the Middle East, as well as in the Black Sea region, dealing with Islamic nations. So it's very important to us. And of course, I live here in Germany, and there are about 4 million Germans that are Turkish ethnicity. So there's an additionally important connection between Turkey and Germany as well. So now, look, let me caveat this up front. I don't excuse any of the bad decisions by Turkey, such as purchasing the S-400, the way they treat journalists. I mean, that's one of the worst places in the world to be if you're a journalist, unless you're towing the line. So there's a lot to be unhappy about with Turkey. But if we're talking strategy, it can't be based on emotion. It can't be based on just who's the current leader. It's got to be about the geography, and it's got to be about our strategic interests. What do we care about in the long term? And then I think we can be a little bit smarter. I mean, candidly, as long as I've been around my Turkish friends and Turkish officers, they have never really trusted us. And I mean that in the sense of they were never sure that they could really count on the United States or NATO if it came down to it, because we tend to sort of surf in and out. And to demonstrate our interest, we take them for granted that we can always have Incirlik. We take it for granted that we can have a couple of other things there, and that they'll always take care of the gate there at the Bosphorus. So, and given the history of the Ottoman Empire and in life since the end of the Ottoman Empire, I can understand a little bit why they have to balance some things. I mean, Norway does that. Norway has to deal with, they live next to the bear, they have to deal with them, as do Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and Poland, all touch parts of Russia. So there has to be some sort of accommodation. Now, what does that have to do with Georgia? I mean, what's Georgia's role? I think, honestly, this current security situation with Ukraine and Russia, and Russia clearly is on the march right now. Georgia can maybe even take advantage of this, see it as an opportunity to help demonstrate to the United States why the Black Sea is so important, why it's important that the United States and Turkey repair our relationship, why Georgia is so important, why Ukraine is so important. And I think, honestly, one of the shortcomings of all my friends in the Black Sea has been a lack of cooperation with other Black Sea nations. Right now, almost every member of Congress could correctly identify Latvia and Estonia on a map. And that's because those Baltic countries, they set up camp in Washington, D.C., and they made sure by working together that they were very loud and understood in Washington and in Brussels. I don't see that from Black Sea nations. I don't see Georgia, Ukraine, and Romania, for example, shoulder to shoulder, working together in the Black Sea region, or Turkey. And so it makes it a little bit more difficult to get attention from the Congress, for everybody to go like, holy hell. I mean, this is big for all of us. Unless you're somebody that really happens to focus specifically on a nation or on a particular issue. Now, Turkey, of course, has worked very hard to develop its arms industry. It's very good, as recently demonstrated by the purchase of Turkish-made drones by Ukraine and also by Poland. And they've already gone to the next generation of improvements. And there are numerous other examples of things that they're doing: shipbuilding, armored vehicles, et cetera. I think Turkey has a critical role to play here. And they've also offered to help mediate the current situation between Ukraine and Russia. I think this is a good role for Turkey to be involved, to demonstrate that it has some clout in the region. My sense was that Georgia and Turkey always had, as far as I could see and tell, normal, good relationships there. You would hope so. And if Georgia and Turkey work together in Washington and in Brussels to help explain, why the Black Sea matters. It's not the bottom right-hand corner of the map; it's in the middle of the map, and how it benefits all of us when we're talking about Iran, Islamic extremism, economics, Russia. I think Georgia can play a role here.
Great. Thank you very much for this thoughtful comments. I can only fully agree with what you said, that there is a need and urgent need of more coordinated policies on behalf of the Black Sea countries to make the case, about the Black Sea security from within the region, and come up with a unified vision and the policy and the strategy of how to actually achieve the better Black Sea security, and then try to sell this to our partners and allies in Brussels, Washington. But it has to start in the region, as you really clearly pointed out. And unfortunately, we do not see the appropriate level of coordination and cooperation between the countries of the region. And there is a lot of room for improvement on that. Okay, I know that everybody's looking forward to your views on what is going on in Ukraine. So I will not test the patience of the audience anymore, and I'll ask you this question right away. What is your reading of Russia's current objectives with regard to Ukraine? And if the offensive starts, another military offensive starts against Ukraine, what do you think that Russians will be willing to achieve militarily through military invasion? Or is it just a part of that hybrid strategy, which you already mentioned in the beginning of this meeting, to put the pressure and then to actually compel or blackmail others into concessions? Or you think that there are really military objectives to be achieved in this situation?
Sure, I will. If you'll allow me one liberty to ask the ambassador if she might want to correct or build on something that I might have said in the first couple of things to repair some damage I may have caused.
Thank you very much, General. No, I thought very insightful, some things I hadn't thought about. In fact, you got me thinking about your last point about how important it is for the Black Sea neighbors to work together in raising awareness. They may even have some additional points as to why this region is important to Europe and to the United States than the four that you outlined at the beginning, which I'll completely agree with. So I think there's some good opportunities to come out of this heightened awareness of the vulnerability of this region, but also of the role that it can play both in security and economic growth. So no, thank you very much for the opportunity, though.
Ambassador, please feel free to step in anytime if you think that you want to make a comment, or if you have any questions to the general from your side. Just please feel free to participate fully in this discussion, which will make it even more interesting for everybody. So back to Ukraine, Ben.
Okay, so I literally just landed this morning, came back from Kyiv. It was almost like a snap exercise last week. Got a call to go with the 5 U.S. ambassadors and General Breedlove on a delegation that was intended to provide assurance to our Ukrainian friends that the United States is with them, but also to get a feel for what's what's happening on the ground. None of you will be surprised. There is a steady flow of congressional delegations going in and out of Ukraine. There are 3 prime ministers arriving today, or tomorrow, and I think on Thursday, President Erdogan from Turkey will be there in Kiev. So you've got a healthy bit of international attention. People are concerned, and so frankly, I think this is a good thing. And all of you will have heard about or seen yesterday Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, who was our excellent ambassador, professional diplomat, ambassador to the United Nations, and her calling out the Russians on what they're doing in Ukraine. And I think the Russian ambassador got up and walked out, which is usually what people do when they don't have anything worth saying, or they can't answer the questions. That's the resort. But anyway, I left Kyiv this morning feeling much more aware of what's going on. I took the temperature a little bit. Of course, it's very concerning there. You can sort of feel it even in the city of Kyiv. I wasn't out on the front line. I wasn't in Mariupol. I wasn't up on the border with Belarus. But even in Kyiv, several people commented that there's a little less traffic. It didn't have that as vibrant as many of you know Kyiv typically is. So people are concerned. There's concern about the economy. And there's been a very public disagreement between the administration of President Zelensky and the White House about what the threat, what's coming, what's happening in the next few weeks. And naturally, that has an impact on economies. I mean, foreign companies start thinking, should we pull out? Our embassy and several others sent families home. And even though our excellent chargé that's there explained State Department rules, regulations, how this is done, this is a proper thing to do for her to make sure the safety of families. Nonetheless, the public face of it was not enthusiastically received, let's say, by the president there in Kyiv. So these things contribute a little bit to concern about what's happening, and especially to the economy. So the president of Ukraine, of course, has to worry about the economy, not just about 125,000 Russian soldiers that are well equipped on all of his borders. So that was one of the concerns. But I also left there encouraged. I left there encouraged. It is clear to me that Ukrainians are going to fight. This will not be like 2014, where the Russians basically walked in and took Crimea. They are going to fight. You can feel it talking to people also. They have a long way to go before the Territorial Defense Force is up to achieving its full potential. But the fact is, there are thousands of people that are stepping forward saying, give me an AK-47. I want to join the Territorial Defense Force. I want to be a part of this. And so you can sense there is a sense of urgency there. And I can assure you that President Zelensky is not confused about the threat. He absolutely recognizes and knows that this is a very real threat. Where I think he and his government disagree with the White House and the Pentagon and others is that it's not going to be this gigantic red arrow that comes across and in multiple directions like we see so many pictures and maps in various newspapers towards Kyiv, but instead probably something that's more like a continuation of what's already happening. Limited objectives, lower profile, absolutely violent, but not the big giant red arrow. Push, push, push. In my view, I would agree with this. I think we're looking at something that emanates out of Crimea. It's easier to sustain amphibious operations in the Sea of Azov and on the Black Sea coast, probably between Crimea and Kherson. Now, a lot of people think that Odessa could be an objective, but that would and they could do some things to neutralize it. But as many of you know, you start talking about combat in cities. I mean, it takes a battalion of soldiers, hundreds of soldiers to clear. I mean, think of the biggest hotel in Tbilisi, right? It would take several hundred soldiers to get around it, secure it, and then you start entering and you have to go in every room. And if somebody in there is fighting back, you're gonna have a lot of casualties. So my point is, let's say there's 50 or 75 battalion tactical groups. That's the fighting unit of Russian land forces. A battalion tactical group is somewhere between 700 and 1,000 troops. Imagine every one of those battalion tactical groups having to be used against these massive apartments and hotels inside Kyiv or in Kharkiv or in Odessa. So that's why I'm a little skeptical about reports that Russia is going to be able to overwhelm Crimea or Ukraine, that they're just going to roll in there, because the amount of manpower that would be needed to do that is significant. Plus, I don't think that the Kremlin, that President Putin actually has any appetite for the number of casualties that they're going to suffer if they do this. And you will not be able to hide these casualties the way they've been able to mask the casualties they've suffered up until now. And I think they also want to stay below a certain level of violence and visibility to make it harder for some European nations and maybe even the United States to invoke the sanctions that, quote, like you've never seen before. I mean, because the big ones, SWIFT, Nord Stream 2, shutting down where all this money is in real estate in London, U.S. financial markets, that's going to hurt us also. So there's if we're only talking about part of the coastline, let's say between west of Crimea or from Mariupol down to Crimea, I'm not sure everybody is on board with the bone-crushing sanctions. So that's why I think they will want to stay below that. And they're still accomplishing their objective. Continued pressure on the Zelensky regime, continued pressure on our unity. Are we willing to really get into a massive fight over Snake Island, Serpent Island? I mean, I think that's the thinking. And of course, the Kremlin will have demonstrated that we can go wherever we want, whenever we want. And I think that has to be taken into account. So then I'll close on this. The key to stopping all that is proactive deterrence. The administration and our allies started off with a passive deterrence, which is based on the threat of punishment. That's all it was. And there were questions like, oh, should we give more javelins? Should we give more radar? Should we do this? Now, the administration has clearly recognized that the threat of punishment means after the fact, which means deterrence failed, and there's no guarantee you'll be able to do it. Yeah. Transition to active deterrence, which is demonstrated will and capability, an endless flow of weapons and equipment, things that Ukrainians need right now, as well as the very visible things like heightened alert of the NATO response force, strengthening NATO's eastern flank. These kind of activities, I think that's the right step. The key, I think, is Germany. If Germany can really act in a much more decisive way, I think we have a much more compelling deterrent effect.
Well, great. Thank you so much for this. Actually, my next question was really about the proper deterrence and how would you see that deterrence working? And if I may ask you to go into a little bit of details in that. First of all, is the West more united today on the idea of the Black Sea security and deterrence in the Black Sea security and about Ukraine than it was few months or years ago? That's one question. The second question is also about this. I read this interesting term on Twitter somewhere, the mother of all sanctions. Does it have to be this big and unprecedented, or there are some specific small things that the United West, let's say, can do to stop and deter Russia's further aggression with regard to Ukraine? And finally, what can be Georgia's stake in all this? So what can a small country like Georgia, which is sitting in the middle of all this, as you mentioned, and does not have a proactive policy or even vision about what to do in this situation? And I get this impression increasingly that we're on the wrong side of all this, honestly, because I have not heard or seen any helpful rhetoric or actions from our side on this. So how could Georgia contribute to, how can Georgia help its friend, ally, and brother Ukraine in this situation? And how can we fit in this unified Western actions and policies on Ukraine today?
So first of all, Georgia has got to be loud and clear and strong in its messaging to all the non-believers in Europe. Say, hey, the Russians are still here in Georgia. What's happening in Ukraine now is just the latest phase of what started in 2008. These are not disconnected. I mean, there's a pattern that the Russians have perfected where they go in and with a different reasons for what they do, and then they end up in the international stage changing the narrative of what happened. So Georgia has got to be loud and clear and consistent and shining a very bright light on what happened in 2008 and then what's happened in 2014 and now 2022. There's a solid line, and the Russians have never stepped back. This is all connected. It's the same thing of the Kremlin, I think, trying to get the empire back, not the Soviet Union, empire. And so that's one way where Georgia can be very helpful. And don't underestimate the importance of the voice of a smaller nation in various international bodies, whether it's OSCE, the United Nations, international courts, every place. Speak up and unmistakable about Russia. You are the aggressor here. You did it to us, and now you're doing it in Ukraine, and hold them accountable. That would be very important. Secondly, what's at stake here, as the German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, she called it what the German phrase is, the gesamte europäische Friedensordnung, the entire European peace structure. That's what's at stake here. And so Georgia has a stake in that. You're on the losing side of that right now already because of 2008. So I would contribute to the information space. But also look at Lithuania. I mean, Lithuania has taken on the Chinese Communist Party. And it's painful, by the way. I mean, this is not without cost. But Lithuania has taken them on. Is Georgia doing anything like that with regards to Russia? I mean, are you threatening some sort of actions? And sometimes these things can pick up momentum. And Russia needs Georgia in a variety of ways. There may be some leverage there that you could use. Now, of course, there's risk with that, but Russia knows that. And so if we're going to hold them accountable, all of us are having to take some risk. I think that intelligence sharing, this goes back to cooperation. You will know things about what's happening in Russia, where troops are, where ships are, better than anybody else. Are you part of a very robust intelligence sharing agreement? I imagine so. and I wouldn't expect you to be able to talk about it, but that would be very important. So these are ways that I think Georgia can contribute. Now, to mother of all sanctions, the president and Secretary Blinken have consistently been using phrases like you've never seen before. I mean, that is sort of the phrase I've heard Vice President Harris say it, the president, Secretary Blinken. And so yesterday, the State Department announced that they have compiled the list of who the lucky winners are, the individuals and their families, their spouses and kids who are going to boarding school in UK somewhere or Stanford University or whatever it is, that would be on the list of individuals that would be sanctioned, that have hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in different places where they think they've been able to protect it. Anybody that's ever had an IRS audit knows that the US government can find your money. So I am confident that the guys at Treasury will know how to do this. And so the idea would be that these oligarchs, are telling President Putin, say, hey, I can't afford to lose my mistress's house on the Adriatic, or my big giant place in Mayfair or Belgrave in London. So putting pressure on the leadership, I think can be helpful. I only wish that we were doing it now. I mean, why? I think it won't be nearly as effective if we do it after the fact, because I don't think that they actually believe we will really go through with this, or not everybody. Maybe the U.S. does, but not everybody. So I think it would be useful to give them a little appetizer to show what it's going to feel like. The last thing I'd say is, deterrence is in the mind of the person that you want to deter. Does President Putin believe, when he's looking on that video screen and he sees President Biden, does he believe that the Prime Minister of the UK, that the President of France, that the Chancellor of Germany, that the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, and everybody else is with him? If he doesn't, if he believes it's just the United States, I think they say, we can ride this out. But if he sees everybody, then I think they hesitate, and that's what's critical. And so what we're doing to try and keep everybody on side is essential to that. I mean, because there's, like I said, I live here in Germany, coalition government. There are a lot of people who, for different reasons, some good, some not so good, really have a hard time seeing Russia as the bad guy here, or they buy into the narrative. And without Germany, then I think our deterrence is a lot less effective.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I will stop abusing my privileges here and go to the questions from the audience in last about half an hour or so that we have left for this meeting. So I will start to the related question to where you left it, General. And this question is from Tavari TV, Natia Goksadze, and she wanted to ask you about the possibility of preemptive sanctions. And this is something that President Zelensky is most probably pushing for or favoring this option. So is it something that you can see coming, or actually you think that the deterrence and threat of sanctions started to work somehow? Because if you see the statements from the officials, and yesterday I also read this great quote in Twitter as well, that Lavrov out-Lavroved himself, by actually blaming the West and the United States in occupying the countries and entering the countries with the military force without the consent of that countries, while Russia is actually deploying a military force only upon the request of the recipient countries. This is, of course, ridiculous. But then there is a lot of cacophony in this regard on this line as well. And there is this contradictory line by the ambassadors in different key capitals of Russia saying that actually Russia does not want war and Russia is not preparing for the war, and that actually Ukraine is to blame. Ukraine and the West is to blame for the escalation. So on the one hand, we hear this clear statements that Russia doesn't want war, but the steps that they take obviously point into the different direction. So do you think that this preemptive sanctions in this context can help, or you think that actually the tensions are already going down a little bit?
So I do believe that we should implement or invoke some of these, I guess implement's the right verb, sanctions. Not all of them, so that there's room, but I don't get the feeling yet. I have not seen language that is indicates any de-escalation or lessening of the threat, even after all that's been done over the last many weeks of diplomacy and the combination of efforts by the United States and allies and friends. So I think it's time to turn up the heat some more and just pick, whether it was some of the individuals or do some things that apply pressure elsewhere, whether it's sanctions, which I would support, or one of my favorites is working with our Turkish allies, where Ankara is 100% convinced that we will not leave them exposed to what Russia might do in retribution, to say there's at least 2 or 3 different articles under Montreux that where Turkey has authority to stop Russian ships moving through or anybody moving through the straits. I think there should be some kind of announcement that this is being seriously considered because of this violation, this violation, this violation. So make the Kremlin stop and start worrying about that. Or if we let it be known that we're developing the plans to blockade the Russian Navy base in Tartus in Syria, make them start worrying about that. I mean, just talking about it, get that into the conversation so that they cannot just focus straight ahead. I'd love to see a nice big snap exercise in Georgia. That's one of my favorite places for us to train. And Georgia's such a good host. So again, and I don't want to create headaches for our great ambassador there, but I mean, I'm thinking, when you look at the map, don't get tunnel vision on Ukraine, but there are other things we can do to include in the Arctic, and so on. The sanctions, though, I think if we wait too long, then the deterrence actually fails.
Great. And there is a question from my good friend, one of our hosts, Ambassador Gigiadze from EPRC. And he is asking actually whether you think that there is still enough room for Putin to retreat from this whole campaign that he has built up there without losing the face domestically. So without any trophy brought back to Moscow, is it possible to de-escalate the situation still?
I love that question. Yes, it is. I do believe that they're continuing to build combat power. They're the Black Sea or Russian Navy is still continuing to concentrate in the region, in the Eastern Med, as well as up into the Black Sea. The amount of forces that are deployed on exercises in Belarus, as well as in other places around the periphery of Ukraine, as well as already inside Ukraine, where they have a bridgehead basically in Crimea and Donbass. They're getting everything in place to do a wide range of things. And I believe that this is intended to put huge pressure on the government of President Zelensky, as well as all of us. And I think that they believe that at some point somebody's going to crack, that there'll be some concession. In fact, there is no doubt, fueled by the Kremlin, there was some talk in Kyiv that they think that some people are speculating that the reason that the US has hyped this up too much, in their view, is to raise the pressure on the Zelensky government so that the Zelensky government would go ahead and agree with some of these nonsensical things where Donetsk and Luhansk could have some sort of autonomy and could influence, in other words, veto Ukraine's ability or influence Ukrainian foreign policy. So this is all somehow connected. It's not by the White House for sure, but that's the language that's out there. So the key is all of us sticking together and making it very clear that there's no way we, the United States, are going to encourage or support or press Ukraine to do anything that affects their sovereignty. Now, skilled diplomats, of course, are always going to be looking for off-ramps to prevent conflicts, but without forfeiting or betraying our values or our friends. So what are some possibilities that would allow President Putin to, say, look, I got the Americans, they cracked, they gave in to my demands, we win on things such as more transparency of exercises. All right. First of all, as you know, these guys never live up to any agreement about transparency. That's okay. I loved it when I had Russian and Belarusian observers come to our exercises or go in our barracks, because they could see, like, wow, these guys are prepared. They're really good. I welcome that kind of transparency, even if they never reciprocated. So let's double down on it. Let's say we'll do way more than is required by the Vienna document in terms of transparency. We'll wear them out with invitations to platoon level live fires, whatever. But increase the transparency, and maybe even I'm probably the oldest person on the net, other than my old friend Tato. They used to have this thing called the Soviet Military Liaison Mission. When we would be out on a reforger exercise, you would see these nice Mercedes driving around with four Soviet officers riding in them, and they were clearly marked, and they could drive around and watch all the exercises. And the acronym was SMLM, Soviet Military Liaison Mission. Of course, the soldiers called them smell them, but there was this transparency. Let's reinvigorate something like that. So that's one thing that he could wave around. The second thing, I'm willing today to guarantee that Lithuania will never invade Russia. I'm willing to guarantee today that Estonia will never invade Russia, even if they really wanted to. I'll guarantee it. And so, in other words, this total fairy tale that NATO is a threat, that NATO is encircling Russia, that no thinking person would actually believe. But if it helps give him something to declare, and also satisfies some of my neighbors here in Frankfurt that it really is our fault and that we are about to encircle Russia with our 30,000 American soldiers that are here in Europe. Okay, let's have a big event, a big signing joint declaration by NATO, the organization that has been guaranteeing the boundary of the Soviet Union since its founding in 1949, and guaranteed the border of Russia since the breakup of the Soviet Union. NATO, the safest part of Russia's border, the one place from which it will never be invaded. We will guarantee that we'll continue doing that. I mean, sign something like that and let Putin wave that around. Now, of course, people say that's ridiculous. Of course it's ridiculous, but make a big spectacle of how ridiculous it is by signing something that he can then wave around. Now, I'm sure that Ambassador Degnan could come up with a much more skillful way to describe, the thing that I'm talking about. But That's two things. And then the third thing, continue to talk. We can talk all day long, all night, because I do hear from a lot of European friends, oh, but we've got to maintain dialogue. Dialogue never stopped. We're in the OSCE together, we're in the United Nations together, you have NATO-Russia Council. There are so many different ways for dialogue, but if that makes everybody happy, talk all night, endlessly, and just make sure we understand who it is we're talking to. We're talking to people that use poison on their own opposition, chemical weapons inside the UK against their own opposition, that chased down an opposition leader and murdered him in the Tiergarten, less than about a kilometer from the Reichstag in Berlin. That's what we're dealing with. These people use cyber that ruin people's lives, businesses, societal structure. This is who we're dealing with. They separate families, they kill people. That's what we're dealing with. So we'll talk all day long, as long as we understand who we're talking to.
Absolutely agree, General Hodges. Thank you for very clearly pointing all this out. And I think we cannot avoid this conversation about the ridiculous ultimatum that was filed by the Russian side in a written way, asking for two ridiculous things, to limit the sovereignty of the partner nations of NATO, like Georgia and Ukraine and others, that and sign the pact that actually NATO will never expand eastwards. And the second thing is to limit the sovereignty of the NATO member states by actually not allowing them to make their own defense arrangements the way they think it's appropriate in the security environment where they find themselves. Everybody understands, I'm pretty sure, including in Moscow and Kremlin, that this is a non-starter and nobody is ever going to sign any of these papers that they have produced. But on the other hand, there is this talk and discussion endlessly in the security community and in political circles that this might be about NATO, and this encirclement narrative you already mentioned, but there are more. How can Russia tolerate NATO forces or military bases at its border? Right? We all understand that there are no NATO bases or NATO forces, and the membership of Ukraine and Georgia to NATO does not threaten any sort of military threat to Russia, as you also clearly pointed this out. But still, there is this dominating opinion in some of the expert and political communities that if Georgia and Ukraine do not strive towards NATO, and if they give up their integration ambitions, then these problems with Russia might go away. Of course, it is not based on anything, and all the facts and all the recent events on the ground prove that Russia has actually not been really concerned about the military threat from NATO, but from letting these countries, in this case Ukraine and Georgia, away from its orbit, and it's about the spheres of exclusive influence. So this question from David Bobokhidze from the audience ties into this discussion and the question. So do you think that actually if Georgia and Ukraine, if one day say that, okay, we are now neutral states, we're not aspiring to join NATO anymore, the problems that we have with Russia on the ground can go away with that easily, or it will become even worse?
Well, I don't think there's anything in history that would give me any confidence that if we just rolled over for them on a couple of their demands, that they would be satisfied. I mean, there's even Bismarck said that no treaty with Russia is worth the paper it's written on. So I mean, there's a historical record of them broadening their reach, always, always, always going for advantage. They have zero interest in some sort of diplomatic equilibrium where, can't we all just get along? They don't live up to any of the agreements. There's a reason we got out of INF. They don't live up to, they don't allow the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to do its job in Donbass, even though they're part of the Minsk process, even though they are part of the OSCE. I don't understand the thinking as somebody believes if we can just let them have some of these things, then they'll be happy. There's nothing in their history, actually in world history, I think, that indicates that would be the case. So I would be very reluctant to support doing something like that. I do believe that everything they do is about advantage. They'll pause if it's to their advantage and wait for us all to lose interest, and then they'll keep going. So that's what we're dealing with.
Okay, great. So I have, I think, two last questions from the chat, and one of them actually hits the point of the importance of economic cooperation, which was raised here by the ambassador and yourself more than once. And the question from Alexandre Kandelaki actually goes to the port of Anaklia, and he is interested whether you are aware of the specific challenges that actually stopped this project, and whether there are any opportunities that you see. How should we revive this? And if you think that this can actually improve the regional security, what are the possibilities to push this project forward one way or another?
Well, let me see just a couple of quick things, and then I might ask the ambassador if she could, because she'll have better visibility on some specific things going on inside Georgia that I would not be able to address, Kelly, if you won't mind that. But for me, you remember in the beginning we talked about the strategy and the strategic importance of the region, and the key is the Caucasus for Georgia to become that portal between Europe and Eurasia, for pipelines, for rail, for telecommunications networks. I mean, I can imagine Georgia being the home for warehouses full of servers, and pipes coming through there that connect East and West. I'd much rather have them going through there than going through Russia or Iran, for example. When my first visit to Georgia would have been in 2000. I think it was 2013, probably. Your president, I had the chance to meet your president, and I asked him, I said, and it was kind of a dumb tourist question, but it was my first time there, and I felt confident enough to ask him, and he was approachable enough. And I said, Mr. President, what kind of country is Georgia? I mean, how would you describe Georgia to a new person like me? And I think he had been waiting all day to be asked that question. He says, we are not a post-Soviet Caucasus nation. We are an Eastern European nation that is the portal between Europe and Eurasia. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And that really stuck with me, how he saw Georgia's role as a European nation that looked east and west. And the geography gave you the opportunity to be this gateway, this portal for all manner of trade. But that means you've got to have port. You've got to have infrastructure and a port that can welcome in the biggest ship that goes into the Black Sea. If you don't have that, then literally Georgia will always be a backwater. And it makes it less attractive for the US Navy to come in there also if you've got limited access, or maybe it's limited to different times of the year because of dredging requirements, that sort of thing. So I think what'll happen is that commerce coming from the Caspian region, it will end up bypassing Georgia and going down through Turkey. And so this is an opportunity. But, in the States, it's very common when you cross the state line, say from Tennessee into Kentucky, there'll be a big sign that says, welcome to Kentucky. we're open for business. In other words, the state is giving tax incentives. They're doing things to attract business to come to Kentucky. Is Georgia open for business? And Ambassador, you could probably clean that up a little bit.
Well said, well said. And I having just been at the Poti Port Terminal opening on Saturday that PACE has undertaken, they have plans to continue because Poti is an attractive location. After visiting Poti, I went up to Anaklia to take a look at the site there, and it just broke my heart because, of course, this year there are supposed to be ships going in and out of that port. It's supposed to be open for business this year had the project continued as planned, and I think it's a real missed opportunity. We see now as the region is opening up with the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, creating opportunities for the region to work as a region. We see what Georgia could have put on the table with something as significant as Anaklia, I hope someday will be, in addition to Poti and Batumi. Georgia really would have had something significant to contribute. Now Georgia's got plans on paper, and I think if investors are going to come in and see this, as the general said, they need to see that the government is 100% behind this project. A number of people unsolicited at the port terminal opening on Saturday said, you don't wait for the cargo to be coming before you build the port. You build the port and the cargo comes. So I think the different feasibility studies support the idea of having Poti and Anaklia and Batumi serving different needs, but encouraging that kind of view of the Black Sea as more of a commercial hub. The Prime Minister mentioned at the port opening, he was there as well, this concept, this vision of Georgia as an east-west hub, not just for ports, but for other kinds of connectivity, for moving goods from Central Asia through to Europe. But you have to have more than words. You have to have strategic plans. You have to be able to market this to good investors to get the ball rolling. And I would say, unfortunately, because Anaklia got tangled up into political and economic difficulties, Georgia is behind the curve in what it can contribute to regional network opportunities right now. I think the government is trying to get back on track with all of these initiatives, but there needs to be a real focused effort. And I think the three countries need to work more closely together in developing these networks, not wait for others to bring them together. And I know Turkey, with this concept of a peaceful neighborhood, is trying to do that because it can serve a sort of central role connecting Azerbaijan and Armenia and Turkey. The countries really just need to grab that and sit down at the table and start working out some plans for the regional development as soon as possible. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, very much for this. And we have 4 minutes, 2 questions, and we have to wrap up our 1.5 hours of a fantastic conversation. So I will try to combine last 2 questions from Elena Kvanchilashvili and from Lucas Fagliano. And both are related to the malign economic interests and harmful investments, on one hand from Russia and on the other hand from China and the Gulf states. And the questions are sort of related to the threats that are coming from this kind of political investments and using trade and economic relations as the tool for political pressure. And what we see is that on one hand, the government of Georgia is using the mechanisms that it has, informal mechanisms that it has for interaction with Russia, such as the infamous Karasin-Abashidze instrument to promote trade and economic relations, despite the fact that we have seen that this economic dependency on Russia has turned out very bad for Georgia's security. And you pointed out a number of times that security and economy need to go hand in hand. So the questions, both questions sort of allude to this threats that are coming from this kind of economic relations and investments. And if and Lucas is specifically asking, how would you think Georgian government is handling this hybrid threats coming from this kind of relations at this point, and what would be your advice to push for it? And this last part of the question from Elena also mentions a very important point about the possibility of FTA with the United States. So maybe Ambassador could give us any updates if there is anything happening on this regard, if there is anything in the pipe or in the future that we can opt for.
So I'll use 1 minute and leave the other minute for the ambassador. For me, this is all about transparency and legal systems and processes that investors trust. That if somebody's going to put money somewhere, they want to know if it goes bad that they're going to get their money back, or that they're not having to pay extra hidden costs that are perhaps illegal. So the making sure that the legal framework supports the idea of being open for business. Right now, you know, the UK is under a lot of pressure, as we're all realizing how much real estate is owned by the former ruling family in Kazakhstan, for example. And of course, that's probably just the tip of the iceberg compared to what Russians own there, and people from the Middle East and from China. So UK is having to relook their laws to make sure that there is transparency, because they have a terrible problem with dirty money right now. And I think transparency, a very active media, and an inquisitive parliament are the keys to making sure that you don't have this sort of malign influence in all your financial systems. Ambassador.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. That's one of the reasons that we and others have been working with Georgia on developing a critical infrastructure investor screening mechanism like CFIUS, but something that would be appropriate for Georgia, to make sure that Georgia knows who is investing in its critical infrastructure, who is owning it. And there's layers and layers before you can really sort out who's got a piece of some of the main infrastructure here that is not only potentially vulnerable, but that is then critical to this idea of an East-West hub. And I think getting that in place now, as Georgia's starting to get back to developing in its critical infrastructure, but also receiving a lot of money flowing through, not always from good, clean sources, is very important. Our goal here is to get good investors to invest in Georgia. There's a lot of potential here, but again, as the general said, the first thing investors look at is, is my money going to be safe in here? Is this a good return on my investment? But also, if I have a dispute, is there a legal system that is a level playing field? Am I going to get a timely resolution of a contract dispute if I have it? Is the bidding process somebody got their thumb on the scale so that all the contracts are going to, certain people and not to foreign investors? All of that is critical to us being able to attract good investors here to Georgia. That's one reason why we and others put so much emphasis on developing that at this point. There's been great progress made over 30 years. I think everybody's impressed with how much progress Georgia has made in 30 years with the help of the United States, the European Union, other friends of Georgia. And those same friends are the ones who are saying, look, let's not stop. Please, Georgia, keep moving forward. Get these oversight institutions put in place. give your parliament the authority to really serve it in an oversight capacity and function as a multi-party parliament that a healthy democracy needs. All of this, I think, is possible, but only with good faith effort on behalf of the ruling party and the opposition parties. They've got to break out of this, this spiral that they're in right now to move this country forward. On the one question you had reminded me of, the good fortune that Georgia had, I think, in terms of its energy security, because of the investment in the BTC and other pipelines back 20, 30 years ago, 20 years ago now, I guess. Georgia is not as reliant on Russia for its energy and certain other things as it might be otherwise. And that is just an example of why it's so important for Georgia to look to diversify its markets. It has been developing new markets, so it's not as reliant on Russia, despite the fact that Russia remains an important trading partner. But at least it has less leverage. Russia has less leverage over Georgia at critical times like this. And so I think it's very wise for Georgia to continue to diversify in order to be more secure. Finally, on the last point about the free trade agreement, I think anybody who has been following US developments knows that trade agreements have not been at the top of the agenda for any country recently. I think that there is a great symbolic value in a free trade agreement between the United States and Georgia, more so than probably an economic value. And we continue to raise it. But again, as you see in the United States, trade agreements are not at the top of the agenda right now. So we'll continue to have that as one of our talking points. But thank you again for the opportunity to participate today and to hear so many interesting comments from General Hodges, as always.
Well, Ambassador, thank you very much for so eloquently summing up this internal political discourse of what we have discussed here in a broader regional and global context, and this is, of course, in clear correlation with the security environment where we find ourselves in, and the response that Georgia, as the country, should actually generate based on the clear understandings of what we want, who we are, and how are we going to achieve our objectives. So thank you very much for that. Well, let me use my one more minute to sum up this really fascinating discussion. When General Hodges and I wrote an article a couple of years ago about new Iron Curtain coming to the Black Sea, it was still a marginal position. Ben, if you remember, we were almost the only ones talking about this, and this was seen as an extreme, point of view back then. But now what we see today is that Russia actually came up with the formal request or ultimatum, which is actually trying to elevate that Iron Curtain right here in the Black Sea. So I would suggest that if anybody has not read that article, to go back and see how we anticipated, unfortunately correctly, what is going on today here. And the tools that Russia is using for elevating this new Iron Curtain in the Black Sea is actually hybrid. It's like the mermaid that we have on the invitation banner here, which is neither a woman nor a fish, but it's a combination and hybrid of both. So as General correctly pointed out, we're in this constant situation when it is no longer a peace, but not yet a war. So this is where we are in Ukraine, and the events around Ukraine today is a clear proof of that. So what is the response to that? Clarity, as much clarity as possible about what our objectives are and how are we going to fight for those objectives, and unity. So to be united, as Ambassador mentioned, on the national interests and national objectives within the countries and between the alliances, and then making this clear point about what our objectives are, and that we're really prepared to take whatever it takes to achieve our objectives, and that's the only recipe towards more peace and stability in this region. That's basically my takeaway from this very interesting conversation. So I would thank both of you very much. Ambassador, thanks for taking time to join this. Ben, thank you so much for this thoughtful comments, as always, thought-provoking, a lot to deliberate and think about, and thank you for participating in this conversation. Thank you very much to the audience for the questions and to EPRC for arranging all this.